me, everyone. So we have Parshas Tetzaveh and we have Parshas Zachar. We'll try to connect the two a little bit. Now, Parshas Tetzaveh is one of the first ones we come to where we bump into people's discomfort about having different types of Jews. In other words, different Shvatim, we understand. But when you have here the Kohanim and Levim, and in this Parsha, the Kohanim get special uniforms. The Kohen Gadol gets an incredibly special uniform. And like I say, I've met some Jews who feel that this is what they would call a caste system, like in India. Somebody, not based on his own merits, suddenly has this power to bless people. He can do mitzvahs that other people can't do, etc. So there's a Kedushas Levi that beautifully explains this idea of the, so to speak, separation of the Kohanim, but their connection to Am Yisrael. And he starts like this. There's a pasuk, Shalom Aleichem. So he says, in Perek Chav Ches, pasuk Hey, it says, V'heim yikchu es hazohav es hatcheles. Okay, we're talking about Chachmei Lev, that are people who have the wisdom in order to make the Bigdei Kehuna, and they would take from the donors, right, the zohav, etc. Now, the Kedushas Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, it's a schus to say his name, they say, Levi Yitzchak ben Sarah Sasha, that to explain why there were private donors giving for the begodim of the Kohen. In other words, why is it that the Kohen didn't purchase his own begodim? So he says that it shows us that the Kohen, even though he was the one who could do the avoda and bring the korbanos, right? There are many aspects of the avoda that only a Kohen could do. Lo haya avodaso shlema in lo hislabesh atzmo ba'avas Yisrael. His avoda wouldn't be complete unless he, so to speak, robed himself with avas Yisrael. What it means, the idea that Am Yisrael are giving the materials for these clothing that the Kohen Gadol is to wear, and the Kohen Hedyot also, is that he is supposed to be enveloped in the sense that he is part of Am Yisrael and that he loves Am Yisrael. And he brings a quote from the Zohar Kodesh, Kol Kohen delo rochim la'ama lav pulchane klum. Any Kohen who doesn't love Am Yisrael, pulchane, that means his avoda, it's nothing. Okay, now, again, we know this pops up later when it comes to Birkas Kohanim, right? That strange bracha that they make, Levarech es Amo Yisrael ba'ahava, right? That we don't find, al netilas lulav ba'ahava or other things like that. It's unique, and the Sfas Emes points out another unique thing about Birkas Kohanim, that the Torah simply jumps into it, Kod tevarchos b'nei Yisrael. This is the way you will bless b'nei Yisrael. It doesn't give the mitzvah. Hashem said to Aaron, you must bless Am Yisrael, and then this is how you do it. There's no tzivui, there's no command there. It simply says this is how you do it. So the Sfas Emes says, because every Kohen is meant to have a constant desire to bless Am Yisrael. That's a Kohen by definition, right? Someone who wants to do that. So he says the separation, the choice of Kohanim, the choice of Levim was done because of his love for Am Yisrael. Now he says it's very important to understand there are two different types of choice. Some choices mean I choose this one and I reject the other one. Okay, like when we have butter on Shabbos, you have ochel and you have psolis. You have that which is the food that you want to eat, and you have like some type of shaft, some type of other material mixed in there that you don't want. Right? He says the idea of choosing Kohanim or choosing Levim is not saying Hashem, I choose this family, the family of Aaron, I don't want these others. He says here the phrase which is used is mitoch b'nei Yisrael, meaning from within b'nei Yisrael and still part of b'nei Yisrael. Okay, that this is how they're chosen. It doesn't say he chose bein hakohanim ubein b'nei Yisrael. He chose them mitoch b'nei Yisrael, meaning this is part and parcel of us for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take these individuals who have this ability to do this avoda, to do it for all of us, but to show, and this is, he said, right there in the Bigdei Kohen, that it doesn't mean that Am Yisrael are loved less. This is actually an expression of love. And so too, when it says that Aaron carried, V'nosa Aaron eshmosam al libo, right? That Aaron had the breastplate with the names of the Shvatim on him, and it says very specifically, in other words, when it tells us how it's worn, we understand where it is and that he's carrying the names of the Shvatim on his heart. The fact that the Torah emphasizes this, he says, now note that this is a strange thing. We don't really mention the schus of the Shvatim anywhere. We talk about the schus Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? We don't seem to mention in the schus of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc. We don't find it, aside from here. So he says, the Shvatim were engraved on those stones, because it says about Aaron, Ki bo bochar Hashem mitoch b'nei Yisrael. Hashem chose Aaron from within, and meaning still within b'nei Yisrael, as a part of b'nei Yisrael. That is the only meaning of his Kehuna. So he says, by choosing one from the klal, he says, it doesn't mean I'm choosing this person because I love him and I don't love the others. The very fact that Aaron is there to carry the other names on his heart shows that that's all part and parcel. Now, the Kedushas Levi refers to this in a few other places. In Sefer Devarim, right, it talks about, again, Kivo Bachar Hashem Mikol Shvatecha. Devarim Yud Ches Hey, it talks about choosing Aaron from your Shvatim. Now again, he says over there that means, right, from but part of, for the purpose of. He also says this about the separation of the Levim. Okay, in Parshas Baaloscha, right, you have the Levim who were separated off and now given to Aaron, and it says mitoch b'nei Yisrael. Once again, they're separated mitoch b'nei Yisrael, and the psukim there start repeating the word Yisrael again and again. Right? Nesunim la'aronu barav mitoch b'nei Yisrael. La'avodas avodas b'nei Yisrael below moed. L'chaper al b'nei Yisrael. V'lo yeh b'nei Yisrael negef b'geshes b'nei Yisrael el HaKodesh. Meaning, as they're separated, right? And Rashi brings down, he says, 5 times it says b'nei Yisrael to show how precious Am Yisrael are, that they're mentioned like that. And he says it's also keneged the Chamishei Chumshei Torah, because the Torah is given to all of Am Yisrael. Okay, so this is the type of choosing which is there. It's something which comes as part of it. It's a continuum. It's something which doesn't mean that suddenly, right, they're separated off from us and we're separated off from them. It's not an idea of choosing and rejecting, right? And it's an idea of the things being where they're supposed to be. There's a beautiful explanation from the Kotzker when at the end of the whole rebellion of Korach, so there was supposed to be this one last proof that Aaron was chosen. It says to bring, all the Nesim should bring their mate, should bring their staff, and put it in Olam Moed. And then they came back the next day, V'hine porach mate Aaron, right? That Aaron's mate, it flowered, it gave forth almonds, etc. And the other ones were sticks. And then Hashem told Moshe to tell the other Nesim that each person should take his staff, right, and go back. Why did they have to take their staff? So the Kotzker said that they would each walk back now happily with their staff, and they would say, Ich nisht, meaning, now I have clarity. I understand that I am not supposed to be the Kohen Gadol, and that's something of joy. Now we know who is and who isn't, so that then the entire process can work as it should. Before we shift into Parshas Zachar, I'll just mention a little bit connected to what we had last week with the Tchoshim. Vern Lopiansky speaks about the idea of the Shvatim, and he talks about that in terms of periods of life as well, right? Because he says many people have a Shevet Levi period in their life where they're able to focus on learning Torah. And then they shift from that. Or we have some people here who have that later in life, right? Where they sit and they learn Torah after having worked for a while. And he says, it doesn't mean that, okay, this is the choice part of your life, and now what can you do? You have to live another life and that's over. It's a continuum. When Hashem gives you the opportunity to have a Shevet Levi period, so you're supposed to take advantage of it, to use it, and then that carries forth through all your Chaye Maisa and all the other things you're doing. Okay, so it doesn't mean that this is it's like you're two people. Rav Hutner has a famous letter where he writes to a Talmud who finished his time in yeshiva and went out and he had a career. And he writes to Rav Hutner that he says, now that I have what he called a secular career, Rav Hutner wrote these words in English in the letter, he says, I feel that I have a double life, right? Meaning, like I'm one person when I'm in shul, when I have a chavrus, I'm another person in the office. And Rav Hutner speaks very strongly, he says, it hurts me that you had such an impression. I would never, he said, give my askama, give my agreement to a concept of double life. He says, a Jew can have a broad life. Right? Meaning, just like a person who has, if you have one house in one country, another house in another country, maybe you'd call that a double life. But if you have one house with more rooms, it's not like you have double life, you have a broader life. So he says, Am Yisrael are supposed to be ma'ached in our lives, right? When we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we're miyached Hashem, right, above, below, all directions. What that means is, he says, imagine geometrically, if you have a lot of dots on the wall, all sorts of dots, you have a lot of dots. But if you arrange all of those dots equidistant from a focus in the middle, you now have one item, a circle. And if you add on more dots to the circle simply gets bigger, but it's still one. Okay? So he says, that's the idea. Am Yisrael is echad. Right? In fact, Echad comes out to 13, the 13 Shvatim when you split Menashe and Ephraim. And our periods of our lives are meant to be Echad. There are times that, the Sfas Emes writes, there are times, B'yom Tov V'tov, it says, there are times when things are going easier for you, better for you. He says, realize life isn't going to be a constant, but take advantage of that to fuel up for when and where things are going to be. So that is a little application of it, right, paralleling in Zman, in the times of people's lives, or the times of Am Yisrael, meaning the very fact also that we had a time with the Beis HaMikdash and we have a time that we don't, it doesn't mean that that's over and disconnected. We still draw power from what was. Okay, now this is an important key as well, because coming up is going to be Zayin Ba'adar, the 7th of Adar, which Chazal tell us it was very key to Haman's excitement about the lot falling on Chodesh Adar, because he said, Chodesh Adar is Chodesh Shemes Bo Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the month when Moshe Rabbeinu died, so therefore the mazel of Am Yisrael is weak. But they say he didn't know the secret. Shebezayin Ba'adar Meis, Bezayin Ba'adar Nolad. That Moshe Rabbeinu was also born on Zayin Adar. So it's also his birthday and his yahrzeit. So some people explain that that's an idea of completeness. But Tzadok HaKohen, others explain the following. As I heard from Moshe Shapira, he said that the secret Haman didn't know is that when a Jew dies, he's born. Bezayin Ba'adar Meis, u'bezayin Ba'adar Nolad. Meaning this section of his life was over, but it still continues on. Meaning, even if that's another type of separation that appears to us, that we were in a world with Moshe Rabbeinu and now we're in a world without. But it's not true. We're still connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. Zichru Toras Moshe, right? It's all connected. We call him Moshe Rabbeinu because that goes on. And that brings us to a fascinating Sfas Emes I love sharing from Parshas Zohar. I have so many bookmarks that are all either tissues or napkins, right, to tell the difference. So the famous Mishnah, okay, it says in the Pasuk, right, the battle against Amalek came to attack. Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on the mountain with Aaron and Hur, and it says in the Pasuk, V'hoya kasher yorim Moshe yodo. When Moshe will raise his hands, V'govar Yisrael, Am Yisrael will be strong, victorious. V'kasher yoniach yodo, V'govar Amalek. And when his hands went down, so Amalek would be stronger. So the famous Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says, V'chi yodav shel Moshe osos milchama oshovros. What is that? That makes the war, his hands go up, his hands go down. Elolom aloch, this comes to teach you, B'zman shisol mistaklin klapi malo. U'meshabdim eslibom lavim shabashamayim hayu mizgabri. That when Am Yisrael would look up and they would subjugate their hearts to their Father in heaven, then they would be strong. V'im lav hayu noflim. And if not, they would fall. That's the Lashon of the Mishnah. Now, Sfas Emes finds a variety of discrepancies here between the Mishnah and between what it says in the Pasuk. He says, first of all, I don't understand the question. When it says, did Moshe's hands make the war or break the war? He said, Moshe's hands did a lot of things. If you just flip back to Mitzrayim, the Eser Makos, Neteas Yodcha, Neteas Matcha, right? It's all these hands. So why should this be so strange that, he raises his hands and this helps us win in the war? He says, also, why did the Mishnah say, V'im lav hayu noflim? Right? In other words, in the Mishnah it says, if Am Yisrael would look up, right, and remember Avim Shevesh Shamayim hayu misgabrim, V'im lav hayu noflim. If not, they would fall. That's not what the pasuk said. The pasuk said, right, that v'kasher yoniach yado, when Moshe Rabbeinu's hands went down, v'govar Amalek. Amalek would get stronger. It didn't talk about Am Yisrael falling. Why would the Mishnah change it? So he says, this is the pshat in the Mishnah. He says, V'chi hayatolei kol zeh b'Moshe Rabbeinu sheyodav osas oshavos milchama. He says, was it really dependent? The entire war depended on what Moshe Rabbeinu did with his hands? He said, if that were true, certainly Moshe Rabbeinu would never let his hands go down. Again, Moshe Rabbeinu was a superhuman person. Isha Elokim, he was up on Har Sinai, didn't eat, didn't drink for 40 days. Right? So you imagine, if life and death of Am Yisrael in battle were dependent on his having his hands up, do you really think he would put his hands down? Right? He says, that can't be. So therefore they answered, Moshe Rabbeinu's hands weren't the Siba, they were the Mesovev. Meaning, they were the result if Am Yisrael looked up and remembered the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then Moshe Rabbeinu's hands would go up. V'im lav hayu noflim. It's not talking about the Bnei Yisrael and the war would be nofel. Moshe Rabbeinu's hands would be nofel. They wouldn't have the strength. The strength of the leader depends on us. This is what he says. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he was the Moshiach of Bnei Yisrael, it all depended on Am Yisrael's hachana, for him to be able to do that. Because all the leaders of Am Yisrael only have their power b'kocham shel Bnei Yisrael. Just like we say that the Aron HaKodesh, Nosias Nosov, it carried those who carried it. Same thing with Bnei Yisrael, right? That the Am Yisrael carry their leaders, so to speak. And therefore he says that that's what it could be in the Pasuk as well. Kasher Yorim Moshe, it's a sign v'govar Yisrael. It isn't that it made Am Yisrael strong. It's a sign that Am Yisrael were strong in terms of ruchnius and they were able to do it. Now he says this milchama is something that goes on because it uses a future lashon. It doesn't say hiniach or herim. It says yorim and yoniach. He says because there are generations that cause Moshe Rabbeinu's hands to rise. Like we said, Moshe Rabbeinu died on Zayin Adar and he was born on Zayin Adar. Moshe Rabbeinu still influences us. So this idea of strengthening the hands of Moshe, he says when Am Yisrael are strong in Torah, that means Moshe Rabbeinu's hands go up, so to speak. And when his hands go down, that's when we're weaker. So it's an important thing to notice and to remember, he says this Sfas Emes in another place, that everything we do affects our leaders. We are the ones who either strengthen our leaders or weaken our leaders. It's an interesting thought to have before doing something. That if I say this Lashon Hara, it's not just that this Lashon Hara affects me negatively, affects the victim negatively, obviously. Obviously, every Avera affects Am Yisrael, but he says there's a particular side effect that you should take into account, that it's going to weaken the leaders of Am Yisrael, because their leadership only comes from us, right? Their voltage, so to speak, can only be what we provide them with. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was told that Lech red, go down from your greatness. Hashem said, did I give you this greatness, right? Only for any reason other than for them. And so too, Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin says in his Sefer Divrei Sofrim, Kol sroras umayla shum adam Yisrael einon mishalo levad. Any rule, any power, any position, any elevation of any person in Am Yisrael, it's not him alone. It michlal haknesiyah. He says it comes from within, just the way Levi Yitzchak said about mitoch b'nei Yisrael. It's part of it. Ve'ein malas kohanim unavim u'malachim mitzad atzmam. The Kohen's, his position and ability, and that of Nevi'im even, their power to be Nevi'im, and Malachim and kings, it doesn't come from the person himself. It only comes from Bnei Yisrael, shehem mehem, that they are part of Am Yisrael, u'michlolam nivcharu, and they were only chosen as part of Bnei Yisrael. Okay, so therefore, right, this again is not to think that the choice of these people comes because of the chisaron of Am Yisrael, but it comes because of how precious they are. So when it comes, just to prepare a little bit for the Avodah of Purim, so something one of my Rebbeim said that helped me focus on a certain part of the Avodah with Purim. There's an idea of leitzonos on Purim. There's an idea of making jokes, making fun. Now, this is a very dangerous territory. When you look, the way Mesilas Yesharim writes about leitzonos, he says a person in a mode of the negative leitzonos, you lose all sensitivity. You're like a person who's drunk. Kal v'chomer, a person who is drunk and making leitzonos, you can do anything and you have to be very careful. But there is a type of leitzonos that Chazal said was allowed. It says, Kol leitzanusa asura chutz mi leitzanusa da avodah zara. All leitzonos is asur, aside from leitzonos making, scoffing, joking about avodah zara. Now, Rav Hutner writes in his Pachad Yitzchak that clearly this doesn't mean only avodah zara. Avodah zara is chosen as the archetype of something negative, but you can use leitzonos to defend yourself against things that are negative. So here, right, this is Rabbi Yankel Drillman Shlita, this very special Rebbe in Chaim Berlin. Now he's a Rosh Yeshiva, what's called Nevardik in Flatbush. So it was once at his house, it was, I forget if it was Purim itself or it was Shabbos Zocher, and he says, what do we mean when we talk about Leitzanusa D'Avodah Zarah? Because we call him Yoshke or Yoizel, we'll say Kratzmach. He said, that's really minor league Leitzanusa D'Avodah Zarah. He said, what Leitzanusa D'Avodah Zarah should we be focusing on? Chazal said, Kol HaMizgoya, whoever's arrogant, right, is as if he serves Avodah Zarah. Why? Because it says, Lo tovi to'eva el beisecha. Don't bring to'eva into your house. To'eva is an abomination. That means, Chazal say, Avodah Zarah. And it also says, To'avas Hashem kol gvalev. A person who's arrogant is a to'eva. So he said, therefore, the ikar leitzanos a person should be focusing on Purim, he said, is machen leitzanos von sich. Make leitzanos for yourself. Don't take yourself so seriously. Don't be arrogant. Don't look down on other people. Feel the mitoch b'nei Yisrael, that any advantage you may have and you may have been given wasn't given for you because of you. Everything is for Am Yisrael and is meant to be used for Am Yisrael. And everyone has these things and we have to appreciate them and to be able to recognize that what we're given is a gift, not for ourselves, but there for others as well. So that's supposed to be the achdus which is there. It doesn't eliminate, Purim doesn't eliminate the fact that there are people who are Gedolei Yisrael, who are Talmidei Chachamim, who are different things which are there. But the togetherness which comes on Purim, because that achdus can be reached. Lech knos es kol ha-Yehudim, Esther said. Go gather together all the Jews. That was a huge feat, and it all depended on that. So this is something that if people are able to do, and hopefully to avoid negative things. Sometimes people's sense of humor on Purim ends up hurting people, insulting people, dividing people. Sometimes, again, one mashgiach said about drinking on Purim, again, which is not what people think it is anyway. It isn't meant for a Jew to suddenly become like a drunken fraternity boy. Right? Purim is supposed to be a day in which you're more Jewish than other day, not a day in which you act like a goy, so to speak, like a drunken goy, call it. That's not what it's supposed to be. So he said, drinking on Purim is a test. He said, you shouldn't take a test you know you're going to fail. Right? In other words, it requires hachana, that a person is supposed to be full of Avos Yisrael. What's supposed to come out on Purim, the sod which is there, nichnas yayin, which is gematria 70, which is gematria sod, is that's what's really deep inside of ourselves. Avos Hashem, Avos Yisrael, Avos Torah, Avos Eretz Yisrael. All these avos are supposed to come out and be there and rejoice at what we have and what we're given. So it can only be done with hachana. Okay, it can only be done with preparation. And these lessons, both from Parshas Tetzaveh and from Parshas Zachor, are a good way to start preparing on the idea of recognizing the interconnectedness of Am Yisrael, right? Amalek attacks when there's nechshalim acharecha, when there are people who are outcast, who are separated off, and these things. Am Yisrael went to war, we mentioned the previous week, for one shivcha, one maidservant, right, who was taken by Amalek, right? Later in the Torah, they went to war for that. The idea of caring about everyone, realizing that we're one entity, that we're one continuum, that Klal Yisrael isn't even just all the Jews in this door, but all the Jews that ever were and all the Jews that ever will be, right? It's a big concept, but Purim perhaps is one day when the mind expands a bit with a good Cabernet Sauvignon or whatever you would recommend, and that helps, right, expand the mind. Rav Hutner says that one reason for the drinking on Purim, he said, Jews get together, he said in Yiddish, fantasieren zusammen, meaning we dream our most beautiful dreams together. That's what it's supposed to be. He gave one other mashal for the drinking on Purim, which again is togetherness. He said, imagine two fellows, they learned in yeshiva together, and then they went out in life, each one got their jobs, and both of them are on a business trip. Suddenly they meet each other in the lobby of a hotel. They haven't seen each other for 20 years. They hug, they say, how are you doing, how are you doing? But each one has a secretary. Says, sir, you have a meeting in 15 minutes. The other one says, sir, you have a meeting in 10 minutes. They said, we barely got to talk. So they tell the two secretaries, you see the bar over there? Drinks are on us, right? Have a good time. And then the two friends get to sit together and be together. He says, all of Am Yisrael, the neshamas, were together at Har Sinai. What separates us? The guf, the body. That's that secretary. I have my body, you have your body. On Purim, put the body to sleep and let the neshamas come together. That is the high picture of what's supposed to be. It's a high level, but at least something to aspire to. Have a wonderful week, a wonderful Shabbos.